The gym that afternoon didn't feel like a movie set or a celebrity training space. It felt like a laboratory, the kind where experiments are run quietly and results speak louder than theories. And standing near the center of the floor was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, all 7'2" of him. Long limbs folded awkwardly as he stretched, his head nearly brushing the overhead lights. While a few feet away, Bruce Lee moved with that familiar economy, light on his feet, rolling his ankles, loosening his hips, breathing evenly, as if gravity applied to him differently, and the contrast between them was so extreme, it almost looked theatrical, like a visual metaphor someone would design on purpose. The tallest man in the room beside one of the shortest, power and reach on one side, speed and precision on the other. And yet there was no tension, no competition in the air, yet just curiosity. Because this wasn't a sparring session meant to prove dominance. It was training, exploration, two athletes from different worlds meeting in the middle to see what truth survived contact. Kareem had already spent time working with Bruce before, not as a student in the traditional sense, but as a collaborator, someone interested in movement, balance, efficiency, and the idea that strength didn't have to look like brute force to be real. And Bruce respected Kareem not just for his size, but for his discipline, his intelligence, the way he listened, because Kareem didn't come into the room assuming his height made him untouchable. He came in assuming there was something to learn, and that humility mattered, because without it, the moment that followed would have landed very differently. They were working through range and distance, Bruce circling, Kareem adjusting, Bruce stepping in and out of striking space, Kareem watching from above, trying to understand how someone so much smaller could control space without controlling territory. And at one point, Kareem chuckled, not mockingly, not dismissively, just amused by the physics of it all. And he said, "You know, there's one thing you'll never do." And Bruce looked up at him, eyebrows lifting slightly, inviting the thought without resistance. And Kareem smiled down and added, "You'll never reach my head." And he didn't say it to belittle Bruce. He said it the way tall people state facts they've lived with their whole lives, like saying the top shelf belongs to you by default. A few people nearby smiled, because on paper it made sense. Bruce barely reached Kareem's chest, standing flat-footed, and the idea of a head-level strike sounded more symbolic than realistic. And Bruce didn't react right away. He didn't argue, didn't correct him verbally, because Bruce almost never argued theory when demonstration was available. And he simply nodded once, thoughtfully, as if filing the statement away, and said, "Okay," in that calm, neutral tone that always made people underestimate how much calculation was happening behind it. They reset positions, Bruce backing up a few steps, Kareem standing relaxed, arms down, posture open, not defensive, because there was no expectation of an attack, and that lack of expectation mattered more than the height difference. And Bruce took a slow breath, feeling the floor through the soles of his feet, aligning his hips, his spine, his center. And in that moment, he didn't look at Kareem's head at all. He looked at the space beneath it, because Bruce never aimed for the obvious target. He aimed for the pathway. What happened next was so fast that people would later argue about the sequence, about whether Kareem had leaned, whether Bruce had jumped, whether the kick was truly as high as it seemed. But everyone agreed on one thing. There was no warning, no telegraph, no dramatic wind-up, just a sudden blur of motion as Bruce's body compressed and released like a spring, and his leg came up in a clean, controlled arc. Not wild, not desperate, but precise. And his foot stopped inches from Kareem's face, right at eye level, hovering there for a fraction of a second that felt much longer. Long enough for Kareem's smile to disappear. Long enough for his eyes to widen. Long enough for the room to go completely silent. Bruce didn't make contact. He didn't need to. The message wasn't in impact, it was in proximity, and Kareem instinctively leaned back, not because he was afraid, but because his body recognized truth before his mind finished processing it. And when Bruce lowered his leg and settled back onto the floor, as lightly as he'd left it. Kareem let out a slow breath and laughed, but this time the laugh carried surprise, respect, and something else. The sound people make when reality gently but firmly corrects them. "I stand corrected," Kareem said, shaking his head. And Bruce smiled softly, not proud, not triumphant, just satisfied that the lesson had landed where words never could. And he said, "Height is an advantage," calmly, "but only if the other person agrees to play under it." And Kareem nodded slowly, because he understood exactly what that meant, not just in fighting, but in life. They talked afterward, not about the kick itself, but about mechanics, timing, the idea of borrowing force from the ground, of letting the floor do the work instead of muscling through movement. And Bruce explained how the kick wasn't about jumping higher. It was about alignment, about compressing the body and releasing energy efficiently, about not thinking of the head as high, but as reachable through motion. And Kareem listened intently, because when a man your size learns that reach is not absolute, it changes how you understand every interaction that follows. What made the moment unforgettable wasn't that Bruce proved Kareem wrong. It was how gently he did it, without embarrassment, without ego, without turning it into a spectacle. And Kareem would later talk about Bruce, not as a small man who could kick high, but as a thinker, someone who understood movement at a level that made conventional assumptions irrelevant. And that one kick, controlled and restrained, became a symbol of something much larger than martial arts. It became a reminder that limitations often exist only because we've never met someone who refuses to accept them. And in that quiet gym, with no cameras rolling and no audience to applaud, one tall man learned that reach isn't just about how high you stand, and one shorter man reminded everyone present that true mastery doesn't announce itself loudly. It waits patiently for the moment when certainty speaks first. After that kick, the room didn't explode into applause or chatter the way people expect moments like that to do. It settled instead, like dust after something heavy has landed, because everyone there understood they hadn't just seen flexibility or athleticism. They'd seen a principle revealed. And Kareem stood there for a moment longer than necessary, hands resting loosely at his sides, eyes focused somewhere past Bruce as if he were replaying the movement frame by frame, not to challenge it, not to dismiss it, but to understand it. And that pause mattered, because it showed the difference between surprise and learning, and Kareem was learning. He finally looked down at Bruce again and asked, quietly, "How?" And Bruce didn't rush to answer, because he never treated curiosity like something to be fed fast food answers. And he gestured for Kareem to walk with him, slow steps across the mat. And as they moved, Bruce talked, not like a coach lecturing, but like a craftsman explaining his tools. "People think height is vertical," he said, "but movement is circular." And Kareem nodded slowly, because that alone reframed decades of instinct, decades of using reach as a straight line advantage. And Bruce continued, "If you chase height, you jump." And he made a small upward motion with his hand, "But if you chase timing, height comes to you." And Kareem stopped walking, eyebrows lifting slightly. Not because he fully understood yet, but because something clicked just enough to invite the next layer. They reset again, this time without any remarks about what could or couldn't be done, because those ideas had already been retired. And Bruce asked Kareem to raise his arm slowly, not in defense, just as a marker. And Bruce demonstrated how most people look at the highest point and aim straight for it, burning energy and telegraphing intent. And then he showed the alternative, how rotation, balance, and ground connection shorten the path in ways the eye doesn't expect. And Kareem watched closely, towering over Bruce, but now fully aware that height alone didn't grant authority over space. Bruce asked Kareem to try the movement himself, not the kick, but the preparation, the compression, the release. And Kareem laughed at first, a soft laugh, because coordinating that kind of elasticity in a body built for basketball felt unnatural. But he tried anyway, carefully, and Bruce adjusted him. Small corrections, a shift of the hips here, a relaxation of the shoulders there, and with each adjustment Kareem felt the difference. Not dramatic, not explosive, but efficient. And that efficiency surprised him more than the kick ever could, because it suggested that his own power, immense as it already was, might still be leaving something unused. As they worked, the conversation drifted beyond technique, because it always did with Bruce, into philosophy without ever sounding philosophical. And Bruce spoke about limits the way engineers talk about load tolerance, not as barriers, but as numbers that change depending on design. And Kareem listened, occasionally asking questions, occasionally just nodding, because sometimes the best questions are silent. And at one point, Kareem said something that revealed how deeply the moment had landed. "I've spent my whole life being told I'm unreachable," he said, not boastfully, just reflectively. "And I believed it." And Bruce looked at him with genuine respect and replied, "That belief served you." And Kareem smiled faintly. "Until now." And Bruce nodded. "Until now." Agreeing without contradiction. The rest of the session passed differently than it had begun, not with challenges or statements to be disproven, but with mutual exploration. Kareem adjusting his footwork, Bruce explaining angles, both men meeting each other, not at the level of size or speed, but at the level of understanding. And the irony was that the higher Kareem's awareness grew, the smaller the height difference seemed to matter, because control of space equalizes extremes faster than force ever can. Later, when they finally broke, sweat-soaked and relaxed, Kareem sat down heavily on the bench, elbows on knees, still shaking his head slightly, and he said, "I didn't think that was possible." And Bruce smiled, that familiar, gentle smile that never tried to dominate the room. "Most things are impossible," he said, "until someone stops agreeing with them." And Kareem laughed again. This time fully, because the statement didn't feel like a lesson anymore. It felt like a shared truth. What people often miss when they retell the story is that the kick wasn't the climax. It was the opening, the moment that cracked the door, because the real transformation happened afterward, in the way Kareem trained, in the way he thought about movement, leverage, and control, and in the way Bruce confirmed yet again that mastery isn't about defeating others, it's about defeating assumptions, especially your own. When Kareem later spoke about Bruce, he didn't describe him as a smaller man who could kick high. He described him as someone who understood the body as a system, someone who saw possibilities where others saw measurements. And that distinction mattered, because it elevated the story beyond spectacle into insight. And that's why the moment endured, not because a tall man was surprised, but because a confident man was open enough to be corrected. And in that quiet gym, without cameras or applause, one sentence had been dismantled, not by argument, but by alignment. And one high kick, stopped just short of impact, had done what words never could. It proved that reach isn't something you own by standing tall. It's something you earn by understanding how everything moves together.